Okay.
Members, good morning. It's the appointed time. We have a quorum. I call to order the meeting. Agenda item number 1, meeting with the administration. Let's invite the administration to join us. Earlier on, we invited the public to submit written submissions. The deadline expired on the 10th of January, Friday. The Secretariat has received a total of 9 submissions, 7 of which had the same contents. The submissions have already been circulated to members and the administration. They have also been uploaded onto the website of LegCo. The administration has already provided a consolidated written response, CB-257/2025-01. Members can refer to it. We have the same team of public officers as that in the last meeting. I now invite Ms. Ivy, Law Deputy Secretary for Environment and Ecology, to walk us through the written response. And the administration will also respond to members in relation to the views expressed at the last meeting. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. We've received written submissions from the public, and we have provided a written response. I believe members have already gone through the response. We have nothing much to add. If there are any further problems, we'll respond to members. At the last meeting, members asked the administration to follow up on a handful of items. First of all, in order to enter the premises earlier, we want to make notice of intended entry a penalty. Without any reasonable excuse, when one doesn't comply with the notice of intended entry, one is liable to level 2 of the penalty. During the discussion on the last occasion, some members asked about imposing any time period. We have internal guidelines on specified time period in relation to the notice of intended entry. Members also asked whether we could set it out clearly in the law. We respect the views of members. We also had a dialogue with the DOJ. If members find it appropriate, we'll add in legislation that within 14 days, the notice of intended entry must be complied with. Otherwise, one must provide a reasonable reason. Any view from members? Based on the response from the DS, that is 14 days in relation to the notice of intended entry. Any views from members? Members can press the button to request to speak. No. Well, excuse me, Chairman. You can ask the administration questions in relation to the response provided by the administration just now. Members last time asked about the occupier entering the premises. Well, please allow me to continue with my question. I already said that this piece of legislation has a wide coverage. Last time I asked about street obstruction. When I went to the district, it may not have to do with the FEHD, but in relation to the livelihood facilities, there's a lack of such facilities, such as recycling facilities. When we recycle styrofoam boxes, each of them cost $3. For items that must be recycled, there is a lack of space for housing these items. There may be more styrofoam boxes in, for example, wet markets. Can we provide a place for citizens to place in these recyclables? Otherwise, there may be clashes or arguments with cleaners. We understand the question of Mr. Stephen Ho. Let's focus on what the DS said. That is about the specified time period in relation to the notice of intended entry. From last meeting, we have 2 items to be followed up. In the case of a conviction, one cannot claim the FEHD. We had much discussion on this topic. Let's see if members have any other views about what the DS said. Ms. Rebecca Chan pressed the button. Please go ahead. Just now you mentioned 14 days. Does it mean when you apply for a warrant from a court, which would take 1 to 2 months, then you will inform the owner of a flat, telling him or her that you would like to enter the premises? After finishing the first or the second stage of an investigation, do you count 14 days from the day on which you enter the premises or from the day on which the letter is received by the owner? At the last meeting, we mentioned garbage apartments, but most of the time, owners of the flats don't necessarily go to these apartments. I'd like to know, for the specified time period of 14 days, how will you impose or execute this limitation? For the notice of intended inquiry, it is to facilitate our entry into the premises. So as the first stage, we issued a notice of intended entry. It is counted from the date right after the issuance of the notice. Without any reasonable excuse, the owner needs to allow our officers to enter the premises. The aim is to allow the administration to enter the premises to initiate investigation in order to minimize nuisance. When we go to the premises, if someone answers the door, we'll give him or her the notice. If no one responds, then we'll stick the notice onto the wall. It is not necessary that we mail notice. There aren't many vacant premises or vacant units. However, if there are vacant units, we'll post the notice to the owners of the flat, but they are in a minority. Usually for units causing nuisance, usually something is going on or the owner of the unit is in the unit. Ms. Edward Leung, we'll stick with the 4-minute time limit. There will be a time limit without any reasonable excuse in relation to the notice of intended entry. But what if there is a reasonable excuse, say after half a year? Is there any specified time period? Thank you, Mr. Edward Leung. There are different situations. For instance, if someone is hospitalized or if someone is out of Hong Kong and cannot make arrangements for other people to help them clear the garbage or to respond, then we may allow reasonable arrangements. In relation to the definition of a reasonable excuse, we have internal guidelines. But if someone repeatedly refuses to comply with the notice, we probably won't find it reasonable. Then we will apply for a writ from the court. We will also inform the court of such a situation. With a warrant, our officers can enter the premises. So do you mean you will have to send letters for a few times? Well, not necessary. Someone may say that he or she does not feel well, but then they do need proof to meet the legal requirement. For example, medical certificate proving that that person on that day cannot effect the entry of the administration. Ms. Rebecca Chan, after sticking the notice for 14 days, will the administration consider that the owner of the flat breaches any law? Will the administration stick yet another notice for another period of 14 days? What is the consequence of not complying with the 14-day period of notice? Well, if someone doesn't comply with the requirement without any reasonable excuse, we find that that person fails to comply with the requirement in relation to notice of intended entry. Mr. Stephen Ho. Am I coming through? Yes, thank you. When someone receives a letter, that is, you serve a notice on that person, how can you confirm that that person has received the notice? For example, if someone doesn't return to the unit, after how long will you request that person to provide proof? When will you apply with the court for a writ or for a warrant? 14 days aren't a long period nor a short period. Probably someone has gone to Beijing. I'd like to know when will you take action when you cannot get a hold of the owner of the flat? After all cases vary from one to another. If the neighbors said the owner of the flat goes to the mainland for business frequently, then this case is different. In general, when we stick a notice of intended entry on the wall, and if the owner of the unit doesn't contact us, when we have reason to believe that that person doesn't go out often, then we'll apply to the court to enter the premises. Well, I mean a specific case when the neighbors don't know the owner of the flat. After how long will you will you take action? You cannot get a hold of the owner of the unit at all. After how long will you take action? Well, we'll apply to the court for a warrant. The court will have a way to contact the owner of the flat. Well, the court doesn't necessarily have the way to contact the owner.
Deputy Director, thank you. Since the notice of intended entry will come with a penalty for non-compliance, we will put the notice in the letterbox of the offender. And if the offender failed to reach back to us within 14 days and there are no ways to contact the offender, then we will conduct an investigation through our channels and try to reach out to the offender. Failing that in 14 days, we will invoke the procedures to apply for a warrant with the court. Now, according to our experience, the process will take some 2 months. In the interim, we will make the court aware of all our previous work to reach out to the offender, to convince the court to grant a warrant to us, and then we will gain entry to the housing unit with that warrant. Yes, that would take a longer time, but like Mr. Stephen Ho said, even if the occupant has left the house permanently, we need to gain entry to confirm that. If an offender deliberately evades the notice, we will take action. I understand, but there should be a common understanding of when the government will take action. 3 months or 3 years? Does it take the scoop to take action to make you take action? I believe that it takes time for the courts to handle these cases. When will you take the step of applying for a court warrant? At what stage? Deputy Director. Now, the notice of intended entry has a compliance period of 14 days. After that, we will apply for a court warrant. Of course, if the occupant is out of home, maybe the notice would go unnoticed. On when we will start applying for the court order, that is after 14 days. Thank you. Any other questions concerning this point? Ms. Rebecca Chan. I think the 14-day period is a great step forward. It sets a deadline for any offender who wants to evade the notice. It greatly shortened the time when the public would be subject to nuisance. Now, for water seepage, you have compressed the compliance time table greatly for step 2 and step 3. So, can we have the same arrangement for garbage apartments? Can we compress the timetable even more aggressively? With the 14-day period set, how much we can compress the time of investigation? Deputy Secretary. Now, with the notice of intended entry, we can address the issue as soon as possible without delay. For water seepage, gaining entry is just the first step. Cases vary, and it is really difficult to quantify the time saved by setting a limit of compliance. The bottom line is, the sooner we gain entry into the house, the sooner we can start the investigation. I believe it is always good to have a deadline. Mr. Chen Hokfeng. Sorry, it should be Ms. Doreen Kong. Ms. Doreen Kong. Now, if I am not mistaken, with the notice of intended entry, if the occupants refuses entry by the investigative officers, the authority can apply for a court warrant. But are you confident that you can be granted with a warrant? From my experience, in most cases, the judges or magistrates are very cautious in granting a warrant. They respect private property rights and they don't grant a warrant easily because the occupants may be out of Hong Kong for business or other purposes. Now, are you really sure that you can get a court warrant within 2 months without any other necessary steps as ordered by the judge? Now, for bankruptcy, the order would be served again and again if the occupants can't be found. So have you discussed the matter with the DOJ or the law enforcement agencies? Deputy Secretary. I thank Ms. Doreen Kong for her suggestions. We have consulted the DOJ on our proposal. Ms. Kong is right. The court would only grant a warrant if they are satisfied that all the necessary steps have been taken. The court is very cautious in the matter. Now, as mentioned by the Deputy Director, there is a process to go through. Now, if the notice of intended entry has been put in the letterbox of the occupant and we are aware that the occupant is not out of Hong Kong, then we will initiate the process of applying for a court warrant. Now, before that, there is also a notice of intention to apply for warrant of entry. That is to notify the offender that we are going to apply for a court warrant. That is an existing provision. Now, if we believe that the occupant is no longer living in the premises, then we will reach out to the landlord and gather evidence and present all the evidence to the court when we apply for the warrant, proving that despite taking all the necessary steps, the occupant is still nowhere to be found. Then the court can make a decision whether the warrants will be granted. We have faith that we can convince the court if that's the case. Mr. Chen Hokfeng, there are many scenarios where the authorities need to gain entry to the house. For example, water seepage, water dripping from air conditioner, or garbage apartments. Are the time limits the same? That is 14 days. Now, garbage apartment is one thing, but what about water drips from air conditioners? that may not be so serious as to warrant such a stringent measure. On the other hand, for very serious nuisance caused by garbage apartments, 14 days are too long. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chen. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Now, according to the original proposal under the bill, without a reasonable excuse, failing to comply with a notice of intended entry is already an offense. However, having listened to members' views on the last occasion, the DOJ and the EEB agree that a 14-day period should be allowed for compliance. Now, but we will be flexible if the offender agrees to allow entry on the 5th or the 6th day. We will still allow that. Now, garbage apartments are a serious issue. Many members have handled similar cases. And on many cases, assistance is required because the occupants of these garbage apartments may be elderly people or people with mental health issues. So the government will take a flexible approach. Usually, the occupants can be found in these garbage apartments, so we will take a more compassionate approach in handling these cases. So for garbage apartments, according to the bill, who will be the one responsible for clearing the nuisance? The owners or the occupants or the government? Now, when we approached government departments in the past, we were told that these are private properties and it should be the owners or the occupants who take the responsibility. I will defer the question to the Deputy Director. Thank you, Chen. Thank you, members. As mentioned by the Deputy Secretary, situations of garbage apartments differ. Very often, they involve occupants who need assistance. Now, instead of taking law enforcement actions, we would more often seek assistance from the social welfare department and social workers to convince the occupants or the family members to allow the authority to enter the house and clear the nuisance. Now, according to the amendments in the bill, government agencies can clear articles which are likely to cause nuisance to the public. But like the member suggested, we will be very cautious because private properties are involved. It would be prudent to invite family members to stand witness to the clearing action so that the private property rights of the occupants are protected. So what about the cost recovery process? Will the government pay for the cost of removal, or will the occupants have to pay for the cost? Thank you. Concerning the clearance action, according to the bill, we have a right to recover the cost from the occupants, but that depends on the circumstances. If the occupants does it deliberately, and if they are fully mentally capable, then we will definitely recover the cost.
江玉歡議
Mr. Kong, I'll be quick. I have one question. Thank you, Chairman. The administration said for those who do not have mental capacity, when you apply for a court warrant, you will have to take an oath. And when you say that the owner of a flat doesn't have mental capacity, have you consulted with the DOJ how you can apply for a court warrant against someone without mental capacity? You have to invoke the mental health ordinance. I have great reservation about it. How can you apply for a warrant against a mentally incapacitated patient? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kong. We refer to persons who are mentally disturbed, and they are not necessarily mentally incapacitated. Thank you for reminding us. When one reaches the threshold of mentally incapacitation, will follow the legal requirement. However, for general garbage apartment cases, when someone is mentally disturbed, will contact the family member of the flat owner. I want to emphasize in the handling of garbage apartments, usually we handle these cases with a human touch. We want to enter the premises to help address the problem. But if the problem of garbage apartments leads to public nuisance, we have the responsibility to handle the situation as soon as possible. We'll let the court handle the problem, and they will take a look at the situation. We have ample discussion, and members also put forward their views. I hope the administration will consider members' views. Mr. Stephen Ho. All right, on the next point. At the last meeting, member asked the administration to reply to a specific point, that is about the handling or removal of an article. That is in relation to perishable items. Mr. Peter Shield. Mr. Peter Shield, thank you. The administration on the last occasion said under some circumstances, goods on the streets may be perishable items. Well, I'm speaking on behalf of the retail and wholesale sector. This issue has to do with the entire sector that I represent. In relation to Dry Seafood Association or different associations in Hong Kong, all of them are concerned about this issue. Let me give you an example. If someone is loading a pallet of goods, and when this takes time, another pallet of goods will have to stay on the ground when the other pallet of goods is still being loaded onto the goods vehicle. I'd like to know any time limit to allow the pallet of goods to stay on the ground. Usually 30 minutes. Well, a worker may have to bring the goods onto a unit and then collect payments. There may be 1,000 apples in a carton box, and when these articles are seized by the administration and when compensation is provided afterwards, 1,000 apples are seized and destroyed. That is a lot to Hong Kong people. You have to take into account the transportation costs as well. If someone is willing to pay the transportation costs as well as the storage costs, why do we still need to dispose of these apples, strawberries, and so on? Say the Chinese New Year is around the corner, probably the goods are for Hong Kong people to use during the Chinese New Year, but then you dispose of these items. One cannot earn $6,000 or $3,000 a day. In some districts, say in Sai Ying Pun, in Shangwan, in the Western District, in the fruit market in Kowloon, these are not ordinary residential areas. They are importers. They also have a storage area in these areas. The business environment, well, we know very well about the business environment in the past 6 months. It's been difficult. I definitely won't agree with you if the legislation is as such. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Peter Shiel. We have actually struck a balance between economic benefits and social cause. As at the last meeting, we mentioned that during the consultation period, many members of the public agreed with enhancing the penalty level, but then we didn't do so this time round. In relation to the handling of goods after seizure, I'll give the floor to the FEHD. Thank you, Member. Allow me some time to talk about the handling of the disposed items. Starting from 2021, we piloted a new way of handling these items together with the police force. For officers to exercise their power under the Summary Offences Ordinance Cap 228, a notice is given to the person concerned to dispose of the items. At present, the time limit is 30 minutes before legislative amendment for perishable items, which are usually fresh fish, fresh vegetables, fruits. Member referred to dried food as well, say dried seafood and so on. These are not perishable items in our opinion. The current practice is to store these items for 48 hours, during which the people concerned can come to us saying that these products are actually ours. Within 48 hours, we'll give them back these items. From 2021 to the end of 2024, in relation to perishable items, we issued a total of 150 plus notices. No one came to claim these items. These perishable items were taken by the administration to store for 48 hours, but then no one came forward to claim these items. For perishable items such as fish, it's complicated because the food may go stale, and this will impact on the public hygiene. In relation to perishable items in the past 3 years, there was actually no case in which someone came to claim the perishable items. So we'd like to make it even more convenient and to facilitate the taking of legal enforcement actions. For non-perishable items, in the past, there were indeed claims for these items. So we have a time limit for people to claim the perishable items. We have taken into account the storage requirement and our experience, so we suggest a faster and more convenient way to deal with perishable items. On the last occasion, we had a discussion. Should we consider whether the street obstruction cases are substantiated? We discussed this at the last meeting. Well, I wasn't here at the last meeting. This is close to the heart of the industry. There is fresh abalone, shark fin, and so on. Are they perishable items? They have been cooked. Are they perishable items? For dry seafood, I believe some of it may be considered perishable items because they have been pre-treated. There are people who apply for compensations. When the administration seizes their items, then they come forward and ask for compensation. So how can you prove that the food is stale or not? Say there are 1,000 apples or oranges. Do you record these conditions of these fruits? For fish and shark fins, how are you going to deal with this? When the administration seizes articles, perishable items on the streets, the responsibility should rest with the person concerned, but then you should allow that person to claim the items. When someone doesn't claim the items within 48 hours, that person is irresponsible. Then we may consider you don't want to get back your items. But say just after 30 minutes, when someone finds that the food or the items have gone missing, when someone calls the police saying that the items have been stolen, but then in fact it is the administration which seizes the items, you have already enhanced the penalty level to $6,000. And you are not allowing the people to get back the items or products. We use the public funds to seize the items, and then you need to compensate those people. When perishable items are placed on the streets, we can transport these items to the cold warehouse. What about the transportation costs? They should be borne by that person. And if that person doesn't come forward to claim the items within 48 hours, we understand that person actually doesn't want these items. How is the procedure different? Why do we have to compensate those people? Say when a vehicle is towed away, how can you dispose of the vehicle? I find it strange.
I think Mr. Peter Shield's views are very clear. Let us listen to other members' views first. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung. Points of order, sorry, Chair. I don't think it is fair to break down the questions and then have me wait for my next turn. Well, I believe we're just focusing on the two areas of concern mentioned last time. So if we're moving to another area, will my order be moved up? Okay, thank you. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung. Thank you, Chair. Two scenarios. One, obstructing public places which obstruct clearance actions. I believe we are talking about scavengers. Now we have to be clear, scavengers are not necessarily homeless people. So now the compliance time has been shortened from 4 hours to 40 minutes. So I hope that will make enforcement actions more efficient. Now, scavenging or hoarding. How do we understand the actions in the context of morning markets? Now, at Tong Shui Road, at North Point, previously, all the dawn markets would disappear before 7 a.m. Nowadays, some of them remains and cause obstruction to morning workers and passengers. So will they be dealt with under the same law? So I believe we should allow pre-dawn or dawn markets to exist if they are cleared away before 7 a.m. We understand that they may cause obstruction to pedestrians if they remain after 7 o'clock. So strictly speaking, those are not garbage, and to many people, they are still valuable items. And many of these scavengers are elderly people, so usually the frontline officers would deal with these cases with great empathy. So much so that some pedestrians would be angry with the obstruction. So now you're aligning the compliance time for short-front extension offender to those for scavengers to 30 minutes, and that is worrying. Now, during and before festivities, many of the merchants would need to unload and load goods outside the shops, and it may be very difficult for them if the law is being enforced strictly. Now, in the past, usually every lorry would come with a lorry attendant. Now, because of the difficulties in operation, the drivers have to unload the goods themselves. And now, drivers can get the tickets very easily. So we need to have a very clear line in terms of law enforcement. The merchants are very worried. Frontline officers in various districts may have different standards in enforcing the law. So we need to have a universal standard on law enforcement to achieve the intended effect. Deputy Secretary, Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Now, concerning causing obstruction to clearance action, according to the original provision, the time allowed was 4 hours. Now, we have amended it to not less than 30 minutes. So for some cases, if necessary, the duration can be extended beyond 30 minutes. Now, for dawn markets at Tong Shui Road, if it causes obstruction to pedestrians, the FEHD would enforce the law of illegal touting or peddling of goods. Now, actually, that is not a pre-dawn market. It is still there at 8 or 9 in the morning. Now, that is to be dealt with under another ordinance, that is illegal peddling of goods, not just shopfront extension. For shopfront extension, the power in the bill is similar to that under the Summary Offences Ordinance in relation to obstruction of public places. Normally, we would allow for 30 minutes for the owners to remove the goods. However, for loading and unloading of goods, we don't treat them as shopfront extension because we understand that that is an operational need. We would issue guidelines to our frontline staff that if they genuinely believe that it is a loading or unloading operation, they will not be treated as shopfront extension. Concerning varying practices in different districts, actually, we have a clear set of guidelines for frontline FEHD staffs. So that will be a guideline. No follow-up questions. Next, Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Chair. I'm still asking my original question. We would like to avoid any potential conflicts between the merchants and the FEHD. Now, if it is clearly specified in the law, then the merchants can operate without worry, and the frontline staff can exercise more discretion. Like Mr. Peter Shield said, we need to have a clear set of standards. So can the administration work it out with the business sector? And over the past 3 years, in more than 150 cases, the obstacles were confiscated and destroyed. So can you give us the details of the figure? Now, the storage cost is still paid for by public money if the goods are unclaimed. Now, I wonder whether this is acceptable by everyone. Can we remove this clause from the bill and have a more detailed discussion with the merchants to see whether that is acceptable, whether, say, dried shark fin or unclaimed should be destroyed after 2 years. I believe that would be better for everyone. The business environment is poor. Now, during and before the Chinese New Year, can these goods be placed outside the shops temporarily without causing obstruction to pedestrians? And I believe this is a problem of town planning. There's 2 little space in wet markets for storing the recyclables like styrofoam boxes. That's why merchants have to put the boxes on the street. They have no choice. Just take a look at the wet markets. Is there room for us to designate a part of the road outside the wet markets for storing the styrofoam boxes? Let's just balance the needs of the stakeholders. Deputy Secretary, now concerning the practices during festivals, the FEHD would exercise discretion to offer convenience to shops. Now, concerning recycling facilities, Mr. Stephen Ho suggested designating spots for storing recyclables. Now, the EPD and the FEHD have been communicating with the district offices to identify spots for storing recyclables. That's not an easy task, but we are working on that. I would defer to the Deputy Director. Yes, especially loading and unloading bays. Thank you, Chair. In practice, concerning shopfront extension, as I've mentioned, we have been operating together with the police since 2021. So it has been 3 years since we have been conducting joint operations with the police. Now we have designated different operational districts with different frequency of operation. Now with the significant improvements in shopfront extension in the past year, we have reduced the number of joint operations to 3 to 4 times a month for the black spots. We mainly target shopfront extension caused by goods. So that is unrelated to scavengers. We do not seek to target scavengers and plastic recyclables. As I've mentioned, for perishable goods, we have received no claims from the 150 cases where perishable goods were destroyed. Now, usually our operations are high profile. We would announce our operation 30 minutes in advance. So there is a high likelihood that the goods confiscated would be claimed back. And usually, the goods confiscated are of low value. There was an occasion where a dish of fish was confiscated. So that the plate of fish was destroyed or disposed of after 30 minutes. Keeping highly perishable goods would come with a high administrative cost. And we believe that there is not a high likelihood for the owners claiming back perishable items. So considering the administrative cost and storage cost of highly perishable items, we think our practice is reasonable. Now, in the past year, there was only one case where the owner claimed back the non-perishable item confiscated within an hour's time. And considering the nature of the goods and according to our experience, we are considering whether we will simply dispose of any perishable items without even storing it. So we believe that disposing the perishable items is the most practical way to handle it.
翻啦，呢個第一。第
I'd like to know how much cost has been spent on these cases. Does the administration have the right not to destroy these items? Say the example cited by Mr. Peter Shield, the shark fin. I'd like to know whether the administration has any discretion in relation to the handling of perishable items. Thank you, Chairman. This piece of legislation gives us power to handle these items based on our experience. We may not see the products on the streets, but we may try to issue warnings to the shops. Our experience is that when no one comes forward to claim ownership of the items, for these items, which are typically low-value goods, the storage costs. It is actually difficult to calculate the storage costs. We don't use the entire warehouse to house these low-value goods, but if the value of the goods is low, it may not be worth the storage costs. However, for high-value goods, the law allows us to handle these high-value goods, but it's difficult to determine on a value. I think we should allow flexibility for frontline officers. Mr. Peter Shield. Thank you, Chairman. Can I go ahead? What about the members? Are they going to speak in the second round? No, please go ahead, Mr. Peter Shield. When you identify perishable items on the streets, according to the new legislation, the administration can seize the items, and when someone comes to claim the items, then they can do so. But among the 100 or so cases for perishable items, when they go stale, then no one will come forward to claim the goods. At present, someone has to be fined $6,000 when they come forward to claim the goods. But when the value of the goods is below $6,000, how will one person come to claim the goods? When someone loses the goods, someone is already suffering from this fact. Someone is already being penalized by the loss of the goods. Someone probably doesn't need, they can receive compensations. Well, if you let the public know this way of handling the products, then I believe many more cases will arise. Many cases will be taken to the court for the court to decide on the value of the goods. It's permissible by law, which allows the administration to use the public funds to provide compensations. The public didn't know. However, if you let the public know this fact, the situation will be different. In the past, when no one came to claim the goods because people didn't know they would receive compensations. I find it very strange. In relation to the administrative costs, if you don't transport the goods to the warehouse, will the pallets of goods be taken away? You need a vehicle anyway. Doesn't that vehicle incur any costs? Otherwise, where will you take the goods to? For officers who are patrolling on the streets, there are costs incurred as well. You're telling me you don't want to incur any cost in relation to transporting the goods to the warehouse, I find it very strange. Well, I understand what you meant. If someone is loading or unloading goods, you won't penalize that person in relation to the 30-minute period. For transporters on the streets, well, I mean, someone told me 45 minutes, whereas you are now telling me 30 minutes. How can transporters deal with this situation? DS. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Peter Shu gave us very good views in relation to loading and unloading of the goods. We don't see that as a shopfront extension SFE. If someone isn't moving goods, we'll have to take into account individual circumstances. When it's beyond 30 minutes, then we may take action. We have to have regard to the actual situation anyway. For perishable items, will they be disposed of right away? The second question, for repeated offenders of SFE, will we give them back the goods? These were the highlights or the main points we discussed on the last occasion. Regarding perishable items, do we dispose of them right away? Just now the FEHD gave you some information for reference. We've heard members, including Mr. Peter Schill, whether a situation will arise where a person lets us seize items that have already gone stale and then ask for compensation. We are confident in assessing the value of the goods. We take into account the status of the items seized. The FEHD has relevant experience, but then we respect the views of the Bills Committee. So on the last occasion, we talked to the DOJ and the judiciary. We inquired about different practices in order to cater for the demand of members. As with the practice of handling hawkers, for non-perishable items, well, I mean, for perishable items, we don't have to compensate the person being convicted of SFEs. I'd like to hear from members what you think of this practice. Just now, the FEHD said that for the past 150 cases, the goods had been stored for 2 to 3 days and the administrative costs are very high. You just now mentioned that the cases will be taken to the court, and that is time consuming. Actually, it's very simple. If some items are perishable, then the items can be stored in a cold warehouse. If someone still has to pay these transportation costs in addition to losing the items themselves, then all the costs will be borne by that person. If someone doesn't come forward to claim the items, why do we still need to compensate these people? They don't want the goods. Mr. Peter Shield's views are very clear. He just raised one point, and I hope you will consider his point. Next member, Mr. Lam Chun Sing. Thank you, Chairman. On the 15th of January, the administration provided a reply in relation to scavengers. This is related to this point as well. Just now you mentioned the case about scavenger. There is no definition in law to decide whether someone is a scavenger or not. When someone places cardboard on the streets, the practice of handling these cases is similar to that in handling cases of miscellaneous items being placed on the streets. Scavengers are actually part of the recycling industry, so to speak. We should give them support. Otherwise, these problems will persist. Of course, this is not the main point of our discussion. We are discussing the impact on scavengers upon the passage of the law. I'm afraid it will be difficult in the future for you to take legal enforcement action. 4 hours shortened to 30 minutes, someone may make more complaints. When an old lady places cardboard on the streets and when the administration receives tip-off, then the administration will have to take legal enforcement action. And it's impossible for the administration to turn a blind eye to specific situations. We have a union where there are FEHD frontline officers. They don't bully old ladies on the streets. They don't seize all of their stuff. Sometimes these frontline officers help them with moving the stuff to the side of the streets. However, if there are more complaints, it's difficult to strike a balance. This is no different from testing frontline officers. This is posing a challenge to frontline officers. For the disadvantaged in society, as you mentioned, there's an adaptation period for these people. Should we give these scavengers a period of adaptation as well? We should give them a grace period. Is it possible to give scavengers place to store the stuff? We need to find a way to resolve the disputes. DS. If this bill is passed by the Council, we will give effect to this piece of legislation 3 months later. We will enhance publicity, we will enhance public education, we will maintain a close dialogue with the policy bureaus and departments to make sure they are up to date with the legislation.
Thank you. I thank Mr. Chan, Mr. Lam for acknowledging the work of the FEHD. Our mission is to maintain public hygiene. Inevitably, operations of scavengers on the streets may undermine public health and hygiene, and it may cause nuisance to others. and we have a duty to handle the complaints. As I said, we have a guidelines requesting our frontline staff to exercise discretion when dealing with elderly scavengers. Now, according to the bill, we will shorten the notification period from 4 hours to 30 minutes concerning articles which obstruct the streets. Whether frontline staff will keep the time strictly depends on their frontline judgment. And even if the scavengers fail to comply with the time limits of 30 minutes, it doesn't mean that we will prosecute the scavengers. Also, we have a very close communication with the scavengers on the street. Our frontline staff offered advice and instructions to the scavengers on compliance with the law, so as to ensure that their operation will not undermine public health and hygiene. We will continue with this line of work. 5 members have pressed the button. I will read their names for timekeeping. They are Mr. Scott Leung, Mr. Rin Kong, Mr. Chen Hok-fung, Ms. Rebecca Chan, and Mr. Ko Wei-keung. I have taken into consideration the number of rounds each member has taken. Mr. Scott Leung, thank you. On the disposal procedures for perishable items, I would like to clarify a point with the administration. According to the bill, for perishable items, in order to save storage and administrative cost, they will be disposed of or destroyed. According to the administration, the frontline staff will exercise their own judgment on how these items are dealt with. That's why I'm worried that even though the law says that perishable items should be disposed of, in particular low-value items, frontline officers will exercise their own judgment for perishable items of a high value. They may allow the merchants to put these goods out on the street, and it may lead to conflicts when frontline officers interpret the law differently. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Leung. First, let's look at the law. The law empowers the authorities to take certain actions, but it doesn't mean that the authorities will have to take those actions. So that's why we said in the law that the authorities may dispose of the perishable items. That provides some flexibilities to the frontline operation or the frontline enforcement of the law. In practice, the FEHD has issued guidelines to the frontline officers on how the question should be dealt with. For example, the Deputy Director mentioned a case where the item involved was a plate of fish with a low value. So considering the administrative cost, the plate of fish was disposed of immediately. However, for an entire carton of shark fin being treated, of course, the frontline officers would try to work it out with the merchants. Please rest assured that despite the flexibility the frontline staff have, they will have a set of guidelines to follow as well. I agree that with a set of guidelines available, some merchants would be reassured. Now, it may add to the workload of the frontline staff because they will have to reach out to the merchants on how to concern the ownership of the box of goods. Now, in terms of the time frame, 30 minutes for removing the obstructing article. This is unprecedented. And it may cause the merchants to worry that the goods would be confiscated after 30 minutes. Now, currently, there is a practice for allowing more flexibility during festivals. So can the merchants get an assurance from the administration that discretion will be exercised upon them so that they can get help and remove the obstructing articles promptly? Deputy Secretary, shopfront extension is not a new offence. There is already an offence under the Summary Offences Ordinance. The mechanism is efficient. Under the Summary Offences Ordinance, there is no provision on the time limit within which the merchants have to remove the goods. Normally, according to our administrative guidelines, the time given would be some 30 minutes. Now, like Mr. Scott Leung said, for some cases, we would allow more than 30 minutes for the owners to remove the goods. So please rest assured. Ms. Doreen Kong. The more I listen, the more confused I am. I didn't have a question before I heard that the ways of handling shark fin and mere fish would be different. Now, to a fishmonger, a plate of fish would be more valuable than a box of shark fin. A lot of merchants in wet markets sell apples and fish. To them, these goods are extremely valuable. And why would you treat them differently from a box of shark fin? Second, I understand that shopfront extension is not a new thing. That is already an offence under the Summary Offences Ordinance. But that doesn't mean that the law is perfect. Why are we trying to put it offence under this ordinance? First of all, it empowers the authority to confiscate the goods. Second, it allows the authorities to dispose of the goods. Three, it allows the owners to claim back the goods, and for any grievances, the owners can file a lawsuit with the courts. Now, there are 4 steps, whether it is a box of apple or a box of shark fin. Now, according to the law, the owner of a box of apple can take all the 4 steps. This is not expeditious at all. This is so counterintuitive. Can you give an example of another city which have such a complicated set of law regarding shopfront extension? Let me share some. I would like the administration to share with us some examples. Now, in the UK and in Sydney, if I need to put my stuff out on the streets for operational purposes, I can make an application with the authorities. However, we have a broad brush approach on this. We do not allow for any individual application for shorefront extension. Chair, I fully understand we want to empower the authorities. However, we are making the mechanism too complicated. We know there are lots of issues to be dealt with, but we need to balance that against the cost on society and the effectiveness of the law. Now, let me give you an example. In September 2024, the Singaporean government passed a law to deal with the so-called petty crime. There is a so-called community dispute resolution mechanism. For petty crimes, we don't need to lock everyone up. These can be dealt with on a district level and harmony can be preserved. We don't need to criminalize every petty crime. Thank you. Any response from the Deputy Secretary? Thank you, Chen. Thank you, Ms. Kong, for your suggestions. First, are we dealing with different goods with different standards? First, if a case of shorefront extension is identified, the first step we take will be to ask the owner to remove the goods themselves. Now, if a fishmonger truly values their goods, they would comply with the instruction. Now, if ample instruction has been given and still the goods is not removed, then we will balance that against the nuisance caused to the public. Shorefront extension is not just a mere obstruction. When the box of goods is placed on the street, some pedestrians will have to take the carriageway. We may still remember that before the Deputy Chief Secretary enforced the law strictly, the situation was so poor that pedestrians have to ask the offenders to leave them some space to walk on the pavement. Now, the penalties under the offences are $25,000 and 3 years imprisonment. So that's not a petty crime, or 3 months imprisonment. Now, there is an avenue for the owners to claim the goods back because we would like to save our administrative cost on storing or managing the confiscated goods. So the authority may dispose of the goods if it is highly perishable. Now, if the owners would like to claim back the goods and is willing to pay the transportation cost, they may do so. That is allowed under the bill. On the last occasion, some members suggested that for offenders who are convicted of the shorefront extension offense, then the goods should not be returned to the offenders. That's the views put forward on the last occasion. After some studies, we decide that for convicted offenders, the court may impose an order that the goods not to be returned to the offender. Also, the asset values will not be compensated to the owner. But there must be a mechanism for the owners to claim back the goods. Failing that, the authorities would store the good for a certain period of time with public money.
Mr. Chen Haofeng. Thank you, Chairman. I understand the concern of Mr. Peter Shield. Well, I think the The administration could have done better in the process. We have conducted public hearings to collect views from society. But we haven't yet let those who will be affected know the actual situation. Could the administration find an opportunity to have a face-to-face communication with the stores that may be affected? Some told me the law enforcement actions are different from what the DS has said just now. There should be more communication. We should have a standard. This will enable stores and storekeepers to better understand the criteria, standard, and situation. There may be conflicts as different frontline officers may have different law enforcement action standards. So there should be more communication. We should listen to storekeepers before we finalize this proposal. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Upon the passage of the bill, as I mentioned, there will be a 3-month period before we give effect to this ordinance. So there will be sufficient time for us to ramp up publicity and public education. The FEHD has a close dialogue with the trade and with hawkers. The provision in relation to SFE this time round, we have conducted a public consultation exercise. We welcome different quarters of the community to provide views. Close to 80% were supportive of this bill. That is to include this offense to the bill. To a certain extent, it reflects calls in society. We have already struck a balance. Upon the implementation of the ordinance, we will continue to improve publicity. Well, we should enhance our communication with stakeholders before the implementation of this ordinance. We should listen to more hawkers during this period so the hawkers will better understand this ordinance. It is not a positive communication if you only talk to the trade or talk to hawkers after this ordinance comes into operation. Yes, I agree. We have been having a close dialogue with the trade. I'll give the floor to the FEHD. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, DS. In relation to SFE, the operation mode has been up and running for a period of time. We have been working in conjunction with the police. We have also been conducting public education activities. Regarding perishable items, to make it clear, the FEHD doesn't aim to seize perishable items from shops. The fastest way is to issue a fine ticket and take law enforcement action. In some cases, we don't know who the owner of the goods is. So we'll stick a notice and we want the owner of the goods to come forward. Then we may consider prosecuting the owner. Just now, Mr. Peter Shiu said if the goods aren't of high value, then no one may come forward to claim the goods. This is what we exactly want to target, that is low-value goods. That's what our discussion revolved around. Regarding SFE, we want to give the power of the police force to the FEHD, so we don't have to ask the police force to provide assistance every time we take law enforcement actions. The difference in legislation is that for low-value perishable items, we do need to store these goods to give an opportunity for the owner of the goods to claim. In the past, there wasn't such case at all. After public education, for low-value goods that no one comes forward to claim, we want to provide a more expeditious means to deal with these items. This is the backdrop of the situation. In the operation area, when we conduct operations regarding SFE, we will enhance public education and we will also let stores know the arrangements in relation to handling perishable items. Next, Ms. Rebecca Chan. Thank you, Chairman. We have heard concerns from hawkers, so before starting clause-by-clause scrutiny, may the administration make good use of this time period to explain the legislative amendments. There are two parts of this bill. There are scavengers, and there are also emotionally disturbed persons. Under the flyovers in Shamshui-Po, a lot of goods are being hoarded in the public. We have had much discussion on how to deal with these items. We have kept 132, and there are also cases in which you cannot get hold of the owner of the goods. You should make it clear that you shorten the hours from 4 hours to 30 minutes. And it mainly targets miscellaneous items on the street instead of food such as fish and shrimps. The administration should make it clear. In paragraph 11 of the paper, you mention SFE. You explain the enhanced penalty level of SFE. There used to be a 4-hour limit. And you said you would also introduce the 30-minute limit under the Summary Offences Ordinance, Cap 228. And you mentioned for normal loading and unloading goods activities, these activities won't be subject to regulation. You mentioned in the paper miscellaneous items, be they fish maul, shark fins, and so on. Just now, I already mentioned the chaos in society. If there are indeed many oranges, it probably takes 2 hours to 3 hours. The 30-minute limit only applies to these items. DS. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Rebecca Chan. we are amending a few provisions. As Ms. Rebecca Chen mentioned, if the articles obstruct the scavenging operation in the provision, there's a time limit of 30 minutes. So we'll have to make it clear which ordinance to invoke. Using the SOO Cap 228, we will introduce it to give the FEHD a power to handle these articles. So the FEHD doesn't have to mount joint operations in conjunction with the police. This is a way to save public funds and to make these operations more efficient. In law, there is no removal time limit, but only in our internal guidelines, 30 minutes or more than 30 minutes for frontline officers to remove the articles. For loading and unloading goods, it shouldn't be considered SFE. We understand this, so in the internal guidelines, we make it clear the loading and unloading activities shouldn't be considered SFE. Thank you, DS, for your clarification. It's become much clearer. We target miscellaneous items instead of goods. The FEHD will independently mount these operations. Many hawkers are worried that their articles or goods may be seized. Will you remind frontline officers to take a clearer look? You should enhance training so when frontline officers take law enforcement actions, hawkers will not feel that they are targeted. This is close to the heart of many people. In the case of loading and unloading activities, this won't be targeted. Is that the case? We should make it clear to allay the concerns of the public. As we mentioned, the FEHD won't stand in the way of the normal loading and unloading activities. Some claim that the goods are being loaded or unloaded, but based on our observation, the goods have been placed in that area for a period of time. In a normal situation, the FEHD doesn't handle any loading or unloading activities. In the front line, there are different situations, especially in shops with more customers. There are much more goods. When staff members keep moving goods into the store, frontline officers won't stand in the way. However, when there is obstruction caused by the goods, we will advise the staff members to move faster in order not to cause obstruction. If, however, the goods are being placed on the streets, we may consider SFE and we may take law enforcement action.
秘書長都
May I seek a clarification from the Deputy Director? Now, we are all concerned about the removal time of no less than 30 minutes. That's about articles, but not short-run extension, correct? You said very clearly that loading and unloading operations will not be subject to the 30-minute rule. The 30 minutes rule only targets those who use the street as their storehouse. Deputy Director, as I said, the intention is not to confiscate the goods. The purpose is to clear the obstruction on the street. So when a box of goods is unclaimed, what we will do is to post a notice on the box, hoping that the owner of the pallets of goods would remove the good within the specified time. So according to our experience in the past few years, our administrative practice is to give the owners 30 minutes to remove the goods. Failing that, we will remove the goods ourselves. When there are staff members handling the goods on the street, we will not remove the goods ourselves. We will request the owner to complete the operation as soon as possible to minimize the nuisance caused to the pedestrians. When there are people manning the goods on the street, we will not remove them. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung. Thank you, Chairman. Everyone is very concerned about the rule because, frankly speaking, business is bad. Everyone would like to have some breathing space. So the trade union or the association is asking the government whether the government can make a promise that the goods will not be confiscated. So what the government said was that for goods or articles of low value, which are supposedly belong to scavengers, they should be removed within 30 minutes because you presume that no one owns them. But if you adopt the same yardstick for goods belonging to the shops, it would be very problematic. So you need to be very clear that there are two sets of rules. Now, we have mentioned that for stubborn offenders and serious cases, only for these cases would you consider confiscating the goods and not returning them to the owners. There are instances where some chain stores occupy the streetscape for a prolonged period. And we know that frontline officers face difficulties in enforcing the law. So you said the rule is 30 minutes, and it would be up to the frontline officers to exercise discretion whether 30 minutes or 3 hours is allowed. Now, some FEHD staff may say that we have already given you 30 minutes and we have offer you the maximum discretion. So I think you need to communicate the plight of the merchants clearly to the frontline staff. And also you have to state clearly that if the owners are moving the goods, they should not be slapped with a $6,000 fine. Now, of course, if the goods value is lower than $6,000, they would not claim the goods back because they would be slapped with a fine instead. So I think the concern lies within the standard of law enforcement operations. So the law says not less than 30 minutes, but in fact there is guideline to frontline officers to give discretion for large-scale loading or unloading activities. Thank you. Let me reiterate. If it is truly a loading or unloading operation, we will not sue the owners with the shopfront extension offense. Of course, for other occasions, we will consider slapping a fine or prosecuting the owners. The trade can be reassured about that. Now, concerning articles causing obstruction to scavenging operations or shopfront extension, once again, these are two separate offenses targeting different behaviors. For shopfront extension, it applies to merchandise of shops only, and there is not a time limit for removing the obstructing articles. The point of the law is not to confiscate the article or the goods, but to remove the obstructing article. So if there is a time limit, we would specify it clearly on the notice affixed to the obstructing articles. So the merchants would be very clear how much time they have to remove the obstructing goods. So that's about shopfront extension. The other offense is about occupation of public places by miscellaneous articles causing obstruction to scavenging operations. This mainly applies to scavengers or people who leave behind the articles causing obstruction to scavenging operations. According to the existing provisions, the time limit is 4 hours. Now we propose to amend it to 30 minutes. So this is different from the shopfront extension offense. For shops, we will invoke the shopfront extension law under the existing ordinance, that is section 86 of the ordinance. Now for scavenge operation, it is section 2 of the ordinance. Completely different. So today's meeting is scheduled to end at 10:30 a.m. There are 3 more speakers. I will extend the meeting by 15 minutes to accommodate all members. Next, Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, Chair. I think those in the business sector, for example, Mr. Peter Schill, will have to represent the interests of the business sector. On the other hand, the FTU will have to represent the interests of workers. Now, in case of a penalty, the workers would be blamed by the employers for attracting the punishment. So we really need a set of clear guidelines from the FEHD so that issues at black spots of hygiene problems and shopfront extension can be dealt with while the interests of workers are protected. In the past, in dealing with illegal parking, the police force has stepped up to issue more tickets. Usually, only one ticket would be issued per day. Now, the police force is issuing parking tickets every 2 hours. Now, for vehicles causing serious obstruction on the road, so serious that the entire road is blocked, the car would be towed away. So can the FEHD do the same so that problems can be addressed while the business sector is also protected. Manpower is a huge issue, so you can't just confiscate or remove the goods every time. So for shopfront extension, even for more serious cases, can you adopt a more compassionate approach to advise the shop owners to change their behaviors? On the other hand, hygienic issues are more serious and strict enforcement is needed. So we need to ensure that the public is understanding about the work being carried out by the government. Deputy Secretary, I agree with Mr. Leung that we need to step up on publicity to ensure that the public understand what we are doing. Deputy Director, thank you. And concerning the streetscape, it is not just the purview of the FEHD. For issues arising from commercial activities in business districts, the police force also enforces the law. Now, under the Summary Offences Ordinance for shopfront extension, we would just affix a notice to the goods. Now, for traffic offences, the police force would carry out law enforcement operations on illegally parked vehicles. The goal is the same, that is to remove articles or vehicles obstructing the streets or the roads. So the FEHD will not interfere with the normal operation of shops. We have already established a set of clear practice concerning shopfront extension. Now, with our efforts, the situation of shopfront extension has significantly improved. Even at the black spots, shops have cooperated by stacking up boxes of goods vertically to minimize the nuisance. Now, over the past year, the number of fixed penalty notices we have issued have reduced by some 80%. We don't want to punish the shops, not to mention prosecute them. Now, we believe that with our operations, the situations at black spots have significantly improved. So we hope that the need for the law to step in will reduce even further with more improvements made. Mr. Peter Chiu. Now, I understand that the FEHD is working very diligently together with the police force, but I don't think you have had sufficient consultation with the trade. The trade is not very familiar with your approach. They are still worried that the goods would be confiscated. Now, according to Ms. Ivy Law, there are suggestions that for repeated offenders, that the goods should not be returned to them. But that would deprive the owners of a chance to get the goods back. Now, I understand that for goods confiscated by the authority, the situation must be serious because the goods must have been left on the streets for more than 30 minutes. So in front of the judge, the offender is always in the wrong. But they have already borne the legal responsibility by paying the fine. For drivers who illegally park their vehicles, they just need to pay the fine. They don't need to have their cars scrapped. Now, for FEHD operations, sometimes the owners of the of a box of fish would say that, oh, this is not my stuff, just take it away. And then the FEHD would have to take away the box of fish. I understand that this is where the FEHD is coming from. But this is before the streetscape operation conducted by the Deputy Chief Secretary. As the Deputy Director said, the situation has improved by some 80%. Now, for stubborn offenders, like those mentioned in my example, they will stick to their ways no matter how you change the law. They see the confiscation of their goods as a part of the operational cost. So there is no way of changing their behaviors. Third, if your practice is to confiscate the batch of goods first and then compensate the owners afterwards, then I am worried that a group of unscrupulous operators would deliberately leave the goods on the street and let you confiscate them and then compensate the owners back. They will have a legal basis of doing so because this is what the law says. And finally, I think you have to make it very clear that if the goods are being loaded or unloaded, the owners will not be punished. I will caption what you have said just now and share it with my constituents because there are always disputes concerning this.
DS. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Peter Shill. Thank you for acting as a bridge between the administration and hawkers. Mr. Nkong, I'll be quick. Thank you, Chairman. Just now, many members mentioned the problem of loading and unloading goods. Just now, the administration said that in the internal guidelines, relevant instructions would be set out. Well, I suggest not setting out in the internal guidelines, but in the law. Under the SOO and Section 86F, you use a broad brush approach. There is no mentioning of loading and unloading goods unless the period of time is longer than usual. Unless we set out clearly in the law, hawkers won't feel reassured. We can draw reference from Singapore Miscellaneous Offence Public Order Nuisance Act 1906, Miscellaneous Order Public and Nuisance Act 1906. You can refer to the 13th provision in relation to SFE. DOJ, please note it down. Under 1C, it sets out clearly for street obstruction or SFE, which is similar to Section 4A of the SOO. It has to be a longer period than is absolutely necessary for loading or unloading goods. If you set out this way, especially under 86F, at least we can allay some of the concerns, despite the fact that we don't have direct control over the SOO. Thank you. Under Section 86F, we make it clear a person commits an offense if the person without lawful authority or reasonable excuse places or otherwise leaves any article in a public place. The scope is very wide. It covers not just loading or unloading goods, Other circumstances are covered as well. Lawful authority or reasonable excuse covers a wide scope. Well, I don't agree with this, Chairman. If you require a lawful authority or reasonable excuse, more often than not, one would have to go to the court and put forward such a reason. Well, we need certainty in the law. If someone is simply loading or unloading goods, one doesn't have to feel concerned. You don't arrest a person and then ask the person concerned to give you an excuse, a reasonable excuse, or a reason. Doing business isn't easy right now. Any more questions? We have had much discussion on this point. I hope the COP or the internal guidelines will be much clearer. So when the bill comes into effect, you will also have to ramp up publicity. Mr. Peter Schill has already expressed his views. Members would like to have flexibility in relation to the claiming of articles or goods. Members express concerns about the 48-hour time period. If one doesn't claim the goods, one will not be able to get the goods, and one wouldn't be able to make any compensation requests either. I hope the administration will take on board members' suggestions. Let's wrap up the meeting today. At the next meeting, we'll continue with policy discussions. After discussion with the Secretariat and the administration, the next meeting will be held on the 7th of February, Friday, at 8:30 a.m. Any other business? There being no AOB, meeting adjourned. Thank you, members.